Becky Roberts is your presenter this afternoon. Becky is a land use specialist with the Center for Land Use Education. She provides training and resources for local elected and appointed officials and staff related to community planning and land use decision-making. Becky is ready to begin.
All right, thank you, Karen, for the introduction, and thank you all for joining us today. We are going to be using the chat throughout, as well as a few poll questions to generate some interaction here. So before we get started, Lynn, if you could launch the first poll, I'd appreciate it. So that should be popping up as a poll question on your screen. There's 3 different questions asking, what is your role? What is your experience with planning, and how many are attending? So as you're filling that out, I'll get started on a few slides and then share the results in just a bit. So the purpose of today's webinar is to talk about updating the plan. So I don't want to just talk about updating the plan, but also about how you can update it to make it more effective when you're using the plan. We'll also be talking about some legal requirements for planning. And then a big portion of the presentation will focus on examples. What are other communities doing? And I like doing this as a learning opportunity because there's not one formula for how to create a comprehensive plan. The planning law provides a structure and a process, but what you put in that plan is up to your community. And then I'll also touch on some sources of assistance, both planning consultants, as well as some planning grant opportunities. So why don't we go ahead and end this poll, and we'll see who's participating. I'm going to share the results. So it looks like we have a mix of elected officials, plan commission members, planning and zoning staff, some clerks and administrators, as well as a few others. I know from the registration that there may be a couple of consultants on board as well. I also looked at the registration list, and I know we have a pretty good mix of communities of different sizes. So about half of participants represent towns and counties, and about half represent cities and villages. And they tend to skew towards the smaller side of cities and villages, small and mid-size. Experience with planning. It looks like about 2/3 of you are familiar with your community's comprehensive plan, which is fantastic. Just over a quarter actually helped develop the plan for your community. Many of you are using the plan regularly for decision making, which is fantastic. These numbers are higher than some of the results I often get. And about a quarter of you say this is your first exposure to planning, which is just fine as well. And a lot of you are watching alone, but there are a few groups watching as well. All right, so I'm going to minimize those results. You may need to X those out of your screen as well. All right, so let's jump into some content. I want to begin with a few of the basics. What does the comprehensive planning law say for Wisconsin? Okay, before I do that, I'd like to start with this quote. This is a quote I found probably over a decade ago from the Village of Little Chute. This was in the prologue to their plan, and they've probably updated their plan many times over since they wrote this. But I thought it just really nicely captured what planning is. So I'll read this to you. When we plan, we're deciding how we want our community to look, function, and feel. We create a comprehensive plan, but this is not just the title of a document, it's the description of a process too. And to me, that last part is really important. It's not just about creating the plan. Yes, the plan is a great usable document. Many of you said you're using that in decision making, but it's also about the process of involving your community. Working together to create what is your vision for your community and how are we going to set about implementing it. Okay, so if we look at state statutes, which provides our comprehensive planning law in Wisconsin, there are some basic provisions or ideas of what a comprehensive plan should be. So this is a statement of a community's long-term vision over a 20-year period. It's a guide to the physical, social, and economic development of your community. It includes goals, objectives, policies, data, and maps, as well as programs and actions to implement the plan. Okay, the plan itself is not self-implementing, but it's a starting point. It's your plan, it's your vision, and then it also lays out a roadmap for how you move forward within your community. There's also a requirement for 9 different planning elements. I like to think of these as topics that you need to address. And so within each of these elements, there's associated data and goals and so forth. So I've listed these here. Some expected ones like thinking about big concepts like housing, transportation, agriculture, natural resources, economic development, and so forth. I will retouch on the idea of elements and content of the plan and how you may want to customize the content of your plan to better fit your community. So we'll come back to this idea in just a bit. Okay, so in addition to providing some structure for the plan for what it should contain, there's also some structure for the process. So the planning law requires that you develop written public participation procedures, and there's a few minimum steps that you need to take within that. So you need to distribute the plan for review and comment. You need to hold a public hearing on the plan, which is preceded by a Class 1 notice 30 days prior. Formally, the Plan Commission recommends the plan by resolution, and the governing body adopts the plan by ordinance. Okay, the plan needs to be filed with a number of different entities, and there's also a requirement that we update the plan at least once every 10 years. Okay, so this is where I'd like to launch a second poll. The first couple of questions that I have on my slide here, do you have a copy of your plan, and when did you last update it, are really for you. Let's see, and actually, I think we launched the wrong poll, but that's okay. We'll actually go ahead with this poll. What I was wanting to know is how are you using your plan? But I've got a couple of pieces here as well. So why don't you go ahead and launch and answer the question that was launched, and we'll come back to those answers in just a bit. Okay, so some common questions that I hear about updating your plan are, we consult it when making land use decisions, particularly things like rezones. A number of communities are using this for action planning and monitoring progress. They're getting much more strategic about laying out what it is that they want to do within their community. For some, they use it to influence budgeting and large capital expenditures. Some are using it for grant applications. This is a really exciting opportunity. I think there's a lot of grant opportunities out there right now. So towards the end of the presentation, I'll get into a little bit more detail about how some communities are looking for grants to support the planning process, as well as to help implement some of the things that they're planning for. Okay. So the first question I ask is, do you have a copy of your plan, and when was it last updated? And this slide really helps to illustrate that point here. What you see here, this was just a recent inventory of comprehensive plans that was created by the Wisconsin Department of Administration just last year. And what you see here, county map on the left, those that have a current plan, meaning it was adopted or updated within the last 10 years, are shown in blue. There's quite a few of them. Those that may have slightly older plans, but still have a plan in place. And I know some of these communities have either since updated or are working on some updates, are shown in dark gray. And then where the Department of Administration could not find any plans, or where they were never officially adopted, those are shown in light gray. And then the same type of map is shown on the right for towns, cities, and villages. So you can see it's kind of a patchwork quilt in terms of who's updated their plans. I would also direct you to the website on the bottom if you're interested. In Wisconsin, we actually don't have a requirement that every single community have a comprehensive plan. It's actually a requirement that if you have zoning or subdivision regulations or official maps, that your plan, that you have an adopted comprehensive plan that's consistent with those tools. And so in addition to inventorying who has updated plans, the inventory also looked at who has those tools in place. So it's really those communities that have those tools in place who are required to have a plan. So I would encourage you to take a look at that report and see if it's updated for your community and what your status is for your community. Okay. I also want you to think about if you have a plan that may be older than 10 years old, or perhaps you're seeing some new issues within your community, how might you want to think about updating your plan? You can certainly do a full-on update of your plan where you start from scratch, but oftentimes communities also take an incremental approach. So you might be looking at your plan and adding to it over time with some periodic amendments. You might be making some minor updates, corrections, or refinements to the plan, maybe adding in a new map or some new census data, and so forth. Okay, so this is an example from a community where they went out and they were doing public participation, and they're saying it's up to our community to decide how much we want to do. Do we want to do the simple update, plug in some new census data, check off our implementation tools and accomplishments and some basic public input? Or do we want to go someplace in the middle or do a full overhaul? Those are all options that are available to you. Okay. So a few simple updates to consider. And actually, why don't we share the results of the poll here? Because this is actually the question I was trying to associate this with. So let's see what you're thinking. Okay, are these poll results showing, Lynn?
I can see them.
Okay.
Can
I
you?
think they should be showing for everyone else as well. So it looks like the most important idea was to update the future land use map. About 3/4 of you are looking to do that. Next, most popular was revisit your goals, objectives, and policies. Address a new or emerging issue, followed by developing an implementation checklist. And then about a third, just less than a third, said update graphics, formatting, or organization. And I'm wondering, Lynn, if there's any other results that were typed in the chat box, because there are a couple of responses that said other.
No, there are
Oh,
not any in the
okay.
chat box.
The other thing that I asked in the set of questions was, what is the single most important topic you want to work on? And I didn't include every single topic here. The two top responses are not surprising to me based upon what I've been hearing around the state. Housing was, and I only let you pick one. This is a comprehensive plan, right? But the reason I wanted you to pick one is because oftentimes we have limited resources. And so sometimes you need to think about, how do we strategically update our plan, or where do we spend more of our time or resources? And so what I'm seeing from respondents here is housing is the #1 issue, followed very closely by land use change. A number of communities are thinking about resilience or sustainability, as well as economic development, and transportation falls pretty low on the list for this particular set of communities. So before we move on, one thing I also want to direct you to is, when the webinar started, Karen included a copy of the webinar resources page. In addition to some of these poll questions, I've also created a document. It's listed right under the presentation and handout. It's called Getting Started with Comprehensive Planning. And it includes a lot of similar questions to some of these poll questions, where you think through, what are the resources, what are the major things that we're looking to preserve or highlight within our community, what grants might we pursue, what might the process look like. So you don't need to go there now, but you may want to take a look at that document if you want to go back and have some conversations with your community. Okay, and so Karen just dropped that into the chat box again. All right, so now I want to move into some of the community examples. And one of the first examples I want to begin with is really an opportunity for communities to check back in on their plans, to really start with, where have we been, so that we know where to move in the future. Okay, so first couple of examples, I'm going to bring you to northern Wisconsin. This is up in the city of Bayfield. And they have a fairly basic comprehensive plan that was updated in 2019. They talk about a number of their historic planning efforts and how they've been ongoing. And from 2002, which was their last plan, they had a fairly extensive implementation checklist. And so they had made some progress. And what I liked about this plan was that they really stressed creating this set of action lists for each chapter, and how they're going to revise and review that on an annual basis. And then that would lead to updating their plan 10 years down the road. But in the meantime, they were going to be doing some annual check-ins. So let me show you what that looked like. Okay. So one of the things that they did is that they created this crosswalk. Up along the top, you can see they've laid out responsibility. And they actually listed, this is only a snippet here, they listed 23 different boards, committees, commissions that were doing work within their community. Remember, this is a pretty small community, so a lot of this work gets done on a volunteer basis. Okay, here you can see that if you read from the top to the bottom, they've listed some of their comprehensive plan goals and objectives. The one I grabbed here is about protecting their natural environment for future generations. They have some supporting objectives below that. And if we just take a look at one of these here, preserve, protect, and enhance native plants, trees, and wildlife in the city. And if you follow across, you can see who is going to be involved in doing this. Okay, so this is Signs responsibility. Their library committee, presumably they're either providing education or doing something on the grounds of the library, as well as the Parks and Recreation Committee, the Plan Commission, and the Tree Board were responsible for taking on these tasks and making some annual progress. They also organize their actions and prioritize them. This is really important. I grabbed some of the higher priority issues here, and they organize this then by the responsible entity. So what should the Plan Commission be working on in the next year? So they're looking at a housing study, thinking about green infrastructure, developing a sign ordinance, as well as a parking study. And then lastly, they supported this by this monitoring form, and they wanted each committee to report back annually to let to compare progress, to see where are we at, do we need to budget for this, what kind of progress do we make, and do we need to make any updates to our goals and objectives. Okay, so I thought this was a really nice example of accountability, of actually putting your plan into action. I should really check back in with Bayfield to see if they're doing this on an annual or at least a periodic basis to see how well this is working. Okay. So I want to pause here, make sure, see if there's any additional questions in the chat box. If not, I will move
I'm
into.
not seeing any, Becky.
Perfect. Okay, so the next section I want to talk about are how to think about some potential updates to your plan from a structural aspect. And by that, I mean, how might you update the content, maybe with some new issues, new elements? How might you update how you're presenting your plan? And this really lends well to the audience or to the purpose of your plan. And then also for some communities, think about who you might partner with in developing your plan. So I'll give you some examples of that. Okay, so staying in the Bayfield area, I grabbed the next plan from the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, okay? And what you're gonna see is that their plan is very different from the city's plan, probably from surrounding towns as well as the county. What they did is they really tailored their plan to meet their needs. So you'll see here on the right, we have our 9 required comprehensive planning elements. And on the left, we have the table of contents from this plan. And you'll see some notable differences. I circled some here. So they have a whole chapter devoted to culture, to human resources, to community well-being. And that's a perfectly acceptable technique. I saw the same thing in the city of Bayfield plan, where they had added, I believe, chapters on education and public health. I've seen other communities add chapters on energy, sustainability, or other topics that are at the top of their mind. Okay, so I want you to think about, what might that look like in our community? Are we satisfied with these 9 elements? Do we want to tweak how they're worded? Do we want to add some additional topics? You have that flexibility to do that. So just flipping through a few additional ideas from their plan. They had a very nice introduction from their tribal council chairman that talked about the history and culture and how they were planning to use the plan. And then they also talked about the 7 grandfathers teachings that was going to be used as guiding principles for the plan. So again, this is not something you're seeing in a typical city or county plan. This was unique to their community. You have the ability to do that. Then in terms of structure and the presentation of your plan, I want to take you to the town of Sebastopol. This is in Door County, so eastern Wisconsin. Smaller community, certainly they have a tourism and seasonal component. And so they had a fairly traditional comprehensive plan, fairly lengthy, typical of what you'd see with other communities. And what they decided to do when they did their most recent update in 2019 was to create more of a graphic and abbreviated plan, as well as an interactive story map. So let me show you what those 2 components look like. Okay, so not everything was this graphic. What I did is I actually pulled information from 2 different pages of their plan. But the idea that I'd like here, and that I'd like to encourage everyone here to think about if you're updating your plan, is, could you summarize the major pieces of each of your planning elements on 1 page? So in this case, I've shown an example from housing. So what's your housing vision? What are your major strategies or policies? What is some supporting data? Okay, so I think this is a really great informational piece, and it's a great way to synthesize information. Oftentimes when you're creating documents, you're editing documents, it's really easy to throw in everything. It's like chicken soup, throw it all in. But if you can pull it back and summarize, I think that's where you really distill out what are the most important pieces of your plan. So I would encourage you to create something like this, kind of as a introductory piece to each element or to the plan. And this is something that can then be shared with community members, whether it's members of your plan commission, landowners, residents, developers. Okay. The second component of their plan was this interactive story map, and you're welcome to view this. But environmentally sensitive areas were a big component of their plan. And so this is an area where you can click and interact. You can look at your own parcel of land. You can look at development and environmental constraints across the landscape. Okay, and then it's almost like a dashboard here. You can also see what we have. So as opposed to traditional planning maps that you oftentimes see in the plan, this was interactive and allowed the user to interact with it. So think about, might this be an appropriate technique for your community? Okay. And lastly, the third technique I want you to think about from a structural component is, do you need to partner with others when you're creating your plan? This is very common at the town and county level. So the first example I have here is a multi-jurisdictional plan for Walworth County, and they worked with 13 of 16 participating towns. Okay, I'm just going to show you a couple snippets from their map. This is a county-wide map for Walworth County. You can see, I just drew a box around each of these potential squares here is a different town. Okay, and one thing you'll see here, all of these different cities and villages are grayed out on this particular map because it's a county plan and the county is planning for unincorporated areas. But what they do show is they show the planned sewer service area. And they do show the growth, the boundaries of these municipalities so that towns and municipalities can be starting to have some of these conversations about where growth is occurring and what their priorities are for land use. Scaling this up even one more level to the region, Southeast Wisconsin is really known for having a lot of regional planning efforts. They've created a number of plans related to land use and transportation. That's their most recent update to their Vision 2050 plan. They have housing, regional housing plans, natural area plans, park and open space plans, and so forth. So I just want to pull a couple of examples from this. This is actually the same snippet from Walworth County. Okay, and you can see here is the same town I pulled out here. And in this map, they're actually showing what's happening now within these municipalities. And what I like about this is fantastic information for the towns. The other thing that they've done within their region is they've recommended a consistent set of future land use categories to be planning for so that they can aggregate and show all of this mapping data in one map. Okay, not only have they done this for each county, they've also done it on a regional level. So if we dig in just a bit more, this map is illustrating how they were trying to direct future housing growth towards sewer communities. Okay, they also laid out a vision for what housing might look like, and this is across the region. So let's say in some of these white town areas up here, maybe we're looking at rural estate or large lot development versus in some of these small and mid-sized cities. Perhaps we're looking at some traditional neighborhoods, maybe a bit of mixed use. And then in our larger cities, maybe like Milwaukee, we have a mixed use city center. And then they showed how does this play out across the region. Okay, so you can see what that looks like. And the other thing that they did is they had some interactive mapping, much like the small scale Sebastopol example, but they're looking at monitoring results. The example I pulled here was looking at where are we getting sewered plats, meaning subdivisions, and where are we continuing to see some of this rural unsewered development. Okay, so it's a means both of planning for the future, thinking about where facilities are located, where major roads are located, where growth pressures are, but then also looking to check back in to see how we're progressing. All right, before I shift gears, I do want to encourage you, if you have questions on this, or if you have ideas for how you might like to make some similar updates to your plan, feel free to share those within the chat, and I'll check in with Lynn if you're seeing anything else that you want me to stop and address at this point.
I'm not seeing anything that I think needs to be addressed, Becky.
Okay. So when I did one of those initial poll questions, I did ask, what are the major things that you're using your plan for? And a lot of you said you're using it in that day-to-day land use type decision making. And I find this is an area a lot of communities struggle. Sometimes they don't know the difference between what zoning should do versus what a future land use map should do. And so I want to show some different examples of how can we use the planning process, different maps, different opportunities for public input to help guide that future land use and to help guide related policies. So again, these are just a few examples I grabbed. There's additional ones I could certainly pull out as well. Okay, so I'm going to start. I think I have 3 or 4 examples here, and I'm going to start with some very rural examples and move towards some more developed areas. Okay, so this is from the town of Seneca. They are a town in central Wisconsin. They have a pretty mixed land use consisting of forests, wetlands, and agriculture. Pretty small population. If you are familiar with this area, you'll know it's cranberry country. Okay, so I want to pull out a couple of maps that were really influential in how they directed future land use and eventually how they zoned their community to reflect that. So this map that you see here is actually a soils map. Okay, and they framed it in terms of basement limitations, building limits. Okay, and they have a lot of sandy soils and very high groundwater. So all of these areas that you see reflected in this red or pink area are areas that have very limited soils for basements. Okay, in yellow, somewhat limited, in green is not limited. Okay, so you can imagine how that was influential in where future residential or commercial development was appropriate, most likely in these green or yellow areas. In addition, they also wanted to direct development towards municipalities that have municipal services. That same map translates for road decisions within the community. So they showed areas in green that are good for road building, yellow where there's some limitations, and red for very severe limitations. Okay, so you can see how this might be reflected when they're thinking about traffic routes for large cranberry harvest trucks, where they're thinking about where they're going to invest in town roads. They're thinking about driveway ordinances. Okay, all of this translates in and forms the basis for their planning efforts. The other thing that was interesting in this community, and I think we're seeing this both in northern Wisconsin and some areas of central Wisconsin, sandy soils translate to a lot of dry pine. Okay, so fire hazards was another big issue within this community. So they were talking about how do we create fire protection zones around individual properties, as well as where might we strategically place some dry hydrants throughout the town. Okay, so again, this is a very rural example and it's very specific to this town, but I would encourage you to think through, are there some specific environmental constraints that would be pretty influential in how you're planning for future land use and other actions within your plan? Soils are always a great one to look at as a starting point. Okay. From here, I'm going to take you to western Wisconsin. This is the town of Tainter in Dunn County, kind of a lakes and rivers area near Eau Claire. Okay. So one thing that I liked that when I was looking through a number of plans, this was a particularly interesting survey to me. First, they had a really great response rate of 50%. And they asked a variety of fairly typical questions related to housing, internet access, recreation, agriculture, how to guide future development, and so forth. Okay. So you can see a couple of those represented here in sample questions. You know, why did you choose to live in the town? Natural beauty, waterfront property, rural character, what you might expect. Where should the town support increased future development of recreation, hiking trails, boating, parks and rec, etc. And then I really like this 9th question I pulled out here. With knowledge that all improvements in the town are done through taxation, I would be willing to pay more for property taxes for the following, okay? This is where the rubber hits the road. It's great if you want all these amenities, but what are you willing to pay for? So this was really influential in guiding where they're going to place, where they're going to invest in future capital facilities and how they're going to direct land uses, recreational development, and so forth. Okay. So some of this also translates through their planning maps. Again, like I suggested in Seneca, oftentimes it's really helpful at a town level, county level, and even within cities and villages to think about this base mapping. What are your environmentally sensitive areas and how does that influence land use? So here, this is the main lake and flowage within their community. North of here were a number of forested and wetland areas, and south was predominantly agriculture. Number of steep slopes as well. Okay. And so how did that translate to their future land use map? Okay. What I want to illustrate here in a, I don't want to say a trap, but a pattern that some communities kind of get stuck in is they equate their future land use map with their zoning map. And I want to say that it does not need to be a one-to-one translation. Okay, this is a future land use map. So thinking about how might we be growing or changing? Where do we want some flexibility? What are some appropriate general areas for future development? So what they did is they used more of a bubble mapping approach. You can see around the lakes where there was already existing platted subdivisions and development. They said, we want to continue to cluster and allow future rural residential development. There are a couple of other areas nearby that they thought they could build on. They included some transition areas. And then really the balance, the remainder, were these agricultural areas, as well as some areas that were a bit more suited for not only agriculture, but rural residential development. Okay, so they described in the text how these areas were approximate. And these are general guides. The other thing that they did is they translated it to policy, to development principles. So basically, rather than laying out every single parcel what's appropriate, they said, when we get a development proposal, we want to examine the area within a quarter mile for impacts to the following resources: agriculture and rural character, environmentally sensitive areas, transportation, emergency access, land use conflicts, etc. Okay. This particular community partnered with the county for county zoning, and so they use this as a basis to provide input on county zoning amendments. So oftentimes communities are faced with a decision to rezone, and it's a legislative decision. You're almost starting from scratch, but it can be helpful to provide criteria like this, decision criteria within your plan to think about when is it appropriate to transition from maybe a more undeveloped to a more developed state, and what are the concerns that might be associated with this. So moving into a couple of more developed examples, taking you down to more Dane County area. This is the village of Mount Horeb, located just west of Madison, just a ways. This is the Driftless region of Wisconsin. And this was a really pretty plan. So I want to show you this one page. This is very similar to what you saw in the town of Sevastopol, where they had this summary, where they summarized their vision. They summarized their vision and strengths related to community character. And then they talked about their overarching plan goals. Okay, so that's just a nice little highlight to look at there. The other thing I want to look at in this plan is how they were planning for future land use. One thing that this community does is shown in blue here. They have this future urban service area boundary. And this community also works with their neighboring towns, and they have extraterritorial zoning. So that's shown, it's a little more difficult to see, but in these dotted red lines. So some of these areas actually lie outside of the village, but they are partnering with the town to make development decisions. So I'm going to zoom in on this section here. Okay, this is the same area here. Again, outside current boundaries. What they did here is they actually put text annotations on the map. And it specifies conditions under which growth may occur. Okay, so what you see here is a statement that development of this area is conditioned on the improvement of a new north-south collector road. So imagine, let's say this community, the town, the village was faced with maybe a subdivision proposal and a rezone request. Let's say they want to transition from agriculture to residential or to some sort of mixed use commercial. Okay, you can see they actually provided some guidance. There's a number of different appropriate uses for this area, but the real consideration here is that infrastructure in place? So you could start to kind of go down that rabbit hole and you could ask, okay, this rezone has been presented. Do we have this road in place? If not, perhaps have we planned for it, maybe in a 5-year capital or road improvement plan? If not, is the developer willing to help fund this as part of the development proposal? And if not, what are your choices? This is probably a good reason why it may not be appropriate for a rezone or for approval of development. Okay, so you can see how this type of guidance can help you say yes or no to a development proposal. The same type of thing, this was on the northeast side of their community where they talked about utility capacity. And so the development density within this area was directly tied to utility capacity. And unless they could increase that capacity, development density was limited. All right, so again, these conditions are unique to Mount Horeb, but think about what capacity limitations do we have in our community? Is it some sort of environmental constraint? Is it a utility constraint? Is it a road constraint? And how can we use that to inform the timing and location of development within our community? Okay, and then the very last example I want to bring you, this is from the town of Grand Chute. This is just outside of Appleton. It's part of a metropolitan area. They've been growing quite a bit. And what they did that was kind of unique in terms of some of the plans I've looked at is they organized their plan based on what's known as the urban transect. Okay, that recognizes we have everything from a natural resource area through to suburban, urban districts, and kind of the idea of town center or even regional development. Okay, let me show you how that translates to their future land use map. So if you are familiar with this area, I think of the Appleton Mall, but really it's the Grand Chute Mall. That's located here in this red area. So they consider this area for future regional commerce, hospitality, and entertainment. This is a town that's really grown into almost a fully developed community. So what they've done is they've gone back over time and they're developing a town center. So I believe this is where their government center is located. It's more of a traditional downtown area, kind of off the beaten path from this commercial development. They have some suburban and urban type areas. And they also have some natural resource protection areas. What I like about this, again, it's not that direct translation to zoning. It's thinking on somewhat of a larger scale and broader categories. Then they also carried this through to their plan when they talked about different policies and infrastructure investments. So here you can see these are the same transects, and they talked about community appearance. Okay, so in these natural resource areas, we're preserving natural landscapes and ecosystems. In our suburban transition areas, we're looking at large lot sizes, setbacks, and buffers. And it keeps getting to higher and higher density, more intense and smaller lot sizes or more intense development. Okay, and then as they got to the most high intensity uses, that regional commerce area and their town center district, they were thinking about design guidelines and also development standards related to landscaping, building materials, etc. The same thing can be said for public utilities. Okay, so in these more natural transition areas, we're thinking about well and septic systems, thinking about stormwater mitigation, etc. Here in some of these more developing areas, we're thinking about expanding and connecting to sewer and water. Okay, in some of these urban areas, we're tracking our aging infrastructure. We're looking at water main breaks, etc. And then again, expanding our urban facilities with continued growth. So what I wanted to show you in some of these different range of plans from very rural to somewhat more urbanizing There's a lot of different directions you can head within your plans, and it's going to be unique to your community. What I was hoping to do here is to provide you with some examples of how do we use maps, how might we format our plan so that it can be usable for different audiences. Okay, why don't we pause here? I think I saw a few questions pop up, and Lynn, if there's any that are appropriate now, this would be a good place to take a few questions.
Sure. We have a couple of them here, Becky. One is a person asking how communities are providing their plans to the public. Is it a printable PDF? Is it individual chapters online? And they were taken by your story mapping example.
Yeah, all of the above, I would say. The story maps are less common, but I think it's a growing and kind of a fun technique. I've even seen zoning ordinances that are presented in more of a interactive mapping format. But there are certainly a lot of traditional plans. Some of our smallest communities probably still have those, printed plans that they may just still have in the city or village or town clerk's office. What the Department of Administration inventory did is it actually looked at who had web mapping sites and were posting copies of their comprehensive plans and their zoning ordinances and their subdivision ordinances. And there's still quite a few out there, more rural communities that don't necessarily have those materials posted online, but it's getting a lot easier. So I think we're seeing PDF copies. I think we're seeing them sometimes divided by chapter, and we're certainly also seeing whole plans provided as well. It really depends on maybe what your capacity is locally for internet connections and how you think people could access them. You're looking at a rural versus an urban community, and you're going to see very different ways of presenting the plan. So,
Okay, thank
other
you.
questions?
The second question was a technical one. Has the Department of Administration updated their population projections based on the 2020 census data?
I know that there were some delays. Census has been a bit of a mess with different ways of collecting and reporting information. It's gone from more of the decennial collection every 10 years that they now have some updated small time estimates. I have not actually looked and visited to see if they've updated their population estimates. Last I heard, I think there was a bit of a lag there, but certainly go out and explore their website to see if they've updated those.
Okay, and that's all the questions we had right now.
All right, great. Well, let me start to wrap up not only with some resources, but some ideas for planning related grants. Okay, this is an area that has excited me recently. It's an area I've delved into a little bit within my own community. I serve on a village board and plan commission, and just across the spectrum of municipalities, I'm seeing there's been a lot of investment in grants at the federal level, at the state level, and then passing that along at the local level. So while we no longer have a comprehensive planning grant program in Wisconsin, there are a number of things that you can tap into. Not only to fund planning, there's some limited opportunities there, but also I want to talk about how you might use your plans to help fund related opportunities. And one pitch I want to make here is it's especially for smaller communities, which I know a lot of those attending are, it's really helpful to partner with your county, your regional planning commission, or even consultants to not only update plans, but then think about how you can use them within grant seeking. Okay, so let me show you some examples and why I think this is important. So I'm going to delve into, I think about 3 or 4 different grant opportunities. Again, this is not comprehensive. I didn't look at every single grant opportunity out there, but these are a few that I'm aware of. So this is one, the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Grant from the Department of Natural Resources that I was able to tap into for park projects in our community. And what I wanted to show you is it's a competitive grant and it's a scored grant. So you kind of have a sense of how you might perform going in, how well you rate against their criteria. And there are a lot of criteria related to planning. So to get your foot in the door, so to speak, you need a comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. Okay, it could be prepared for your municipality, your town, city, village, or you could also partner with your county. So that's what we had here. We actually did not create our own outdoor recreation plan. We partnered with the county and we inserted just a little summary of our park resources. And then we had a few bullet points of these are our priorities. We did that because the county had prompted us, not thinking that we could pursue grants because of it. In the end, it worked out in our favor. Then you can also see that there's a point scoring system, and you get additional bonus points for elements, for having a comprehensive plan, for talking about intergovernmental cooperation within your plan. And there's also bonus points available if you have some of these other plans in place, and they show how they support your project. So lake management or riverway plan, resource plans, green space plans, water quality plans, and so forth. So we were actually able to get bonus points for all of those different things. So I want to point that out. If there's, in this case, a park, recreation, open space type opportunity that you'd like to pursue in your community, and you think it might be helpful to pursue grants to help with land acquisition or improvements, put that stuff in your comprehensive plan, okay? It's going to look better when you're applying for grants. It's going to show that you put in the effort and that you're prioritizing those projects. Another opportunity, I didn't look where everyone was from on this webinar, but for those coastal communities, I think there's about 15 counties in the state, and any communities within those potentially can tap into our coastal management grants. So the town of Sevastopol plan that I pulled up earlier is actually one where they were able to help fund their comprehensive plan update. They are tweaking the criteria just a bit so that you need to focus more on coastal resources or an element within your plan. But there are a number of communities over time that have tapped into this for planning purposes. So check that out if you're located near Lake Michigan or Lake Superior. Another example that I think is really underutilized is the Community Development Block Grant Program. They have a specific, not only an infrastructure grant, but also a planning program grant. So I pulled here on the right some of our recent awards. There were actually none in 2023 because no one had applied. So this is not a competitive grant. This is available to communities outside. There's some communities that get CDBG funding automatically because they're larger communities. If you're not one of those entitlement communities, you can tap into these types of funds fairly easily. It's non-competitive. It's a $50,000 award, and this can be used for comprehensive plans or other plans, site level or community level. Okay. The one thing that may be a barrier is that it needs to be 51% lower moderate income. So this could be community-wide, or you could make the case that there's a certain segment of your community that qualifies. Okay. It also has a fairly low match requirement, only $1 local match for every $2 in grant assistance. So check this out if you're looking for some different planning opportunities, whether it's a comprehensive plan or some of these other ideas. Okay. And then one other resource I want to put a pitch in for, WIDA has developed some new very low interest loan programs related to housing. And I want to point out that in order to access these, you must have updated your comprehensive plan within the last 10 years and specifically updated the housing element of your plan within the last 5 years. So again, just another pitch for why you might want to update some of your planning documents. Lastly, I want to dive into a few different sources of recommended resources. I've talked about partnering with your county, and that's fantastic, especially for all of our towns and some of our smaller cities and villages. You can also tap into your regional planning commission. The website down here on the bottom will help you connect and locate where you might be located and who to reach out to. Okay, again, they can oftentimes help with grants and funding, planning, data research, mapping, and oftentimes they're particularly strong as well at transportation and economic development. It really depends on the region in terms of who their staff are and what capacity they have. One specific regional planning commission that I already mentioned, that's particularly strong and has some resources that may be helpful statewide is Southeastern Wisconsin RPC. Okay, a couple, if you follow this website, a couple of resources I'd recommend looking at. In addition to sample plans, they also have sample public participation procedures, public hearing notice, a resolution and ordinance to update the plan. I think if I recall, these might be provided in Word format, so you can just modify them for your community. And I've also seen a list of consultants for comprehensive planning. And then lastly, another great place is the Wisconsin Department of Administration. They just made some recent updates to their website and added some additional resources. So here you can find a library of adopted plans. So if you're looking for references, perhaps you're working with a consultant and you want to see what kind of work they've done in the past. You can look at what's been adopted, what's available. They have planning element guides. They have a recap of some of the legal and procedural requirements for planning, and then a number of resource links to data, mapping, agencies, etc. Okay, and then a couple of chapters in our Plan Commission handbook also are relevant to planning. Chapters 3 and 4 related to community planning and public participation. And the piece that's really helpful here is there's actually a number of worksheets that can help you think through how do we go step by step through thinking about what our plan should include, what public participation should look like, and so forth. So check those out as well. All right. So Lynn, if you want to go ahead and launch the last poll. So this one should be looking for actions that communities are interested in taking. We'll go ahead and launch that. And then
I'm not sure why, Becky, but it's not launching, but I can read it and people could reply in the chat.
Sounds good.
The question is, do you plan to take any of these actions after attending this webinar? And please list any of these that apply. Locate our comprehensive plan. The second one is review and consider updates to the plan. The third is reach out to our county, our regional plan commission, or consultants for assistance, so reaching out to others. And the fourth is share the webinar resources with my community.
Okay, and those are really just prompts to say, what can we do that's actionable? The other thing I would encourage you is visit that webinar resources page, and there's that link called Getting Started with Comprehensive Planning. That may be a good starting point if you're thinking about, either you individually or perhaps with your plan commission or a small group in your community to think about how do we get started? What are some of the resources that we have available? What steps might we want to take? Lynn, as people are answering this, are there any additional questions that I can address at this point in time?
I'm just seeing them responding to that poll. Many say they will review, consider updates, or they just say they will update it. Some communities are saying they're going to share the webinar resources, and also some are saying they plan on reaching out to the county or the RPC.
Okay, and mysteriously the poll just launched. So you're welcome to.
That's interesting.
You're welcome to complete that now. We also do have one final demographic question that we will launch at the end as well. And I will move forward to that slide after we close out. Actually, why don't I just go ahead and a number of people are still responding. I'll end the poll now though. Share the results. Okay, so actions after the webinar, review and consider updates, share resources with my community, reach out, and then locate our comp plan. That's a good starting point if you don't know where it is. And a lot of communities are in that boat, so don't feel like you're alone. So I'll stop sharing. And then Lynn, if you want to launch that very last voluntary demographic slide, this just helps with our reporting to see who we're reaching and making sure that we are responding to needs around the state. So I feel free, if you'd like to answer this question, we will not share the results of this. If you do have additional questions that you'd like to include in the chat box, Lynn will continue to monitor that.
I do have one additional question here, Becky. One person says, I had been under the assumption that a comp plan was to be updated every 20 years rather than 10. Is this a recent change?
It's not a recent change. If you actually read the statutes early on in the statutes, when I talked about this is a guide to, the social, economic, et cetera, aspects of your community over a 20-year period, you should be planning for a 20-year period. Then as you get farther down into statutes, it says that the plan must be updated at least once every 10 years. Okay, so those are not contradictory. You're planning for a 20-year period, but you're checking in every 10 years. And again, some communities check in annually, or they check in every 5 years, whenever they have resources and time available to make some of those plan updates. That's a great question. Anything else we're seeing in the poll or in the chat?
No, I don't see any additional questions.
All right, if you don't have additional questions, I just want to thank you once again for attending. I encourage you to use some of these additional resources and to think creatively about how you might engage your community in developing a plan that's usable for your purposes. So thank you all for attending.